Peace. What's good? I hope your today is greater and your tomorrow is greater. Yeah, stand up music productions. Um, just gonna have, I believe, is the last piece of the second chapter. Peace. I want to see if I should as an Instagram. I don't know if it'll let me. I see no. Oh wait, hold on 1 second. 1 second. If not, what can I say? Did the camera go the wrong way? My bad. My bad. Better. All right, peace. The prison label. Most people imagine that the explosion in the U.S. prison population during the past 25 years reflects changes in crime rates. Few would guess that our prison population leaped from approximately 350,000 to 2.3 million in such a short period of time due to changes in laws and policies, not changes in crime rates. Yet it has been changes in our laws, particularly the dramatic increases in the length of prison sentences, that have been responsible for the growth of our prison system, not increases in crime. One study suggests that the entire increase in the prison population from 1980 to 2001 can be explained by sentencing policy changes. Because harsh sentencing is a major cause of the prison explosion, one might reasonably assume that substantially reducing the length of prison sentences would effectively dismantle this new system of control. That view, however, is mistaken. The system depends on the prison label, not prison time. Once a person is labeled a felon, he or she is ushered into a parallel universe in which discrimination, stigma, and exclusion are perfectly legal, and privileges of citizenship, such as voting and jury service, are off limits. It does not matter whether you have actually spent time in prison. Your second-class citizenship begins the moment you are branded a felon. Most people branded felons, in fact, are not sentenced to prison. As of 2008, there were approximately 2.3 million people in prison and jails and a staggering 5.1 million people under community correctional supervision, like probation or parole. Merely reducing prison terms does not have a major impact on the majority of the people in the system. It is the badge of inferiority, the felony record, that relegates people for their entire lives to second-class status. As described in Chapter 4 for drug felons, there is little hope of escape. Barred from public housing by law, discriminated against by private landlords, ineligible for food stamps, forced to check the box indicating a felony conviction on employment applications for nearly every job, and denied licenses for a wide range of professions. People whose only crime is a drug addiction or possession of a small amount of drugs for recreational use find themselves locked out of the mainstream society and economy permanently, as well as some violent offenders. No wonder then that most people labeled felons find their way back into prison. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics study, about 30% of released prisoners in its sample were rearrested within 6 months of release. With 3 years, nearly 68% were rearrested at least once for a new offense. Only a small minority are rearrested for violent crimes. The vast majority are rearrested for property offenses, drug offenses, and offenses against the public order. For those released on probation or parole, the risks are especially high. They are subject to regular surveillance and monitoring by the police and may be stopped and searched with or without their consent for any reason or no reason at all. As a result, they are far more likely to be arrested again than those whose behavior is not subject to constant scrutiny by law enforcement. Probationers and parolees are at increased risk of arrest because their lives are governed by additional rules that do not apply to everyone else. Myriad restrictions on their travel and behavior, such as prohibition on association such as prohibition on associating with other felons, as well as various requirements of probation and parole, such as paying fines and meeting with probation officers, create opportunities for arrest. Violation of the special rules can land someone right back in prison. In fact, that is what happens a good deal of the time. The extraordinary increase in prison admissions due to parole and probation violations is due almost entirely to the war on drugs. With respect to parole in 1980, only 1% of all prison admissions were parole violators. 20 years later, more than one-third, 35% of prison admissions resulted from parole violations. To put the matter more starkly, about as many people were returned to prison for parole violations in 2000 as were admitted to prison in 1980 for all reasons. Of all parole violators returned to prison in 2000, only one-third were returned for a new conviction. Two-thirds were returned for a technical violation, such as missing appointments with a parole officer, failing to maintain employment, or failing a drug test. In this system of control, failing to cope well with one's exile status is treated like a crime. If you fail, after being released from prison with a criminal record, your personal badge of inferiority, to remain drug-free, or if you fail to get a job against all the odds, or if you get depressed and miss an appointment with your parole officer, or if you cannot afford the bus fare to take you there, you can be sent right back to prison, where society apparently thinks millions of Americans belong. This disturbing phenomenon of people cycling in and out of prison trapped by their second-class status has been described by Luke Waquant as a closed circuit of perpetual marginality. Hundreds of thousands of people are released from prison every year, only to find themselves locked out of the mainstream society economy. Most ultimately return to prison, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Others are released again, only to find themselves in precisely the circumstances they occupied before, unable to cope with the stigma of the prison label and their permanent pariah status. Reducing the amount of time people spend behind bars by eliminating harsh mandatory minimums will alleviate some of the unnecessary suffering caused by the system, but it will not disturb the closed circuit. Those labeled felons will continue to cycle in and out of prison, subject to perpetual surveillance by the police, unable to interrogate into the mainstream society and economy. Unless the number of people who are labeled felons is dramatically reduced, and unless the laws and policies that keep ex-offenders marginalized from the mainstream society and economy are eliminated, the system will continue to create and maintain an enormous undercast. So that's the end of chapter 2, and that was the prison label. I hope your today is great and your tomorrow is greater. Peace.